As soccer takes center stage this summer, Comcast helps bring the experience home to America. As the exclusive Spanish-language home of the tournament in the U.S., Telemundo is set to present its most expansive coverage ever. 700 hours of programming, live on-site presence at all 104 matches. And with multi-view and real-time 4K, Xfinity will deliver the most innovative and immersive sports viewing experience for fans watching on Telemundo, Peacock, Fox, and FS1. Learn more at ComcastCorporation.com.
This episode is brought to you by Google Health. Stop chasing someone else's definition of health. What matters is what's healthy for you. Google Health offers a new kind of coach built with Gemini for effortless tracking, sleep insights, and holistic coaching tailored to you. Visit googlestore.com to learn more and start a new relationship with your health. Requires Google account, Google Health app, internet, and Google Health premium subscription. Features subject to change. Availability and results vary. Not intended for medical purposes. Works independently of Gemini apps. Check responses for accuracy.
Pay's checkout is offered by your banks and credit unions. So when you shop online at participating merchants, your cards appear in one place. Pay's. It checks out. Activation required. See Pays.com to learn more. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn. Welcome to another How We're the podcast. And as we've had a good few conversations recently, looking ahead to next season, we thought we'd try and keep that going a little bit. Gav got a few of the lads together to talk about potential transfers during the summer, which was all good fun to listen to, and where we might strengthen, where we might not, how it all might play out. I remember Bummer and Andrew joined me a while back to put their predictions down on how the summer might go as well. Also, me and Gav had the pleasure of speaking to Nick Bonds over the last week or so on how the club might be viewing the summer ahead. So we thought today we might take a little different look at it. So we thought we'd look at the historical context a little bit, because actually it surprised me a little bit when I thought that it's only the third time that we've prepared for a second season in the Premier League. So what we thought we'd do would have a look at those, and actually just looking at second seasons in general in the Premier League. So luckily for me, I have a couple of gentlemen ready to talk about all things Sunderland and our second season in the Premier League. And first up, we have Gav Henderson. Hello, Gav.
Morning, mate. How we doing?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. Just before we'll let the listeners in behind the curtain a little bit, because we're talking between the quarterfinal and the semi-final. We're not quite sure when this will go out, Gav, but getting excited about England?
Yeah, I've let myself get a bit carried away with it now. I was struggling. I think I said this repeatedly in other pods, but I have struggled to just get into things and just really buy into the whole World Cup, really, from an England perspective. I found more pleasure watching the Sunderland players play than I did watching England in the early games. And obviously now all the Sunderland players are out. And a cheap plug for a pod from earlier in the week that I did with James Nichols and Ant, but we went over the World Cup from a Sunderland perspective and how every player did and stuff. And I think that's allowed us to kind of mellow out a bit. And I watched the game on the weekend and at my mate, and it was a bit of an event. We had a bit of a get together, all families and stuff, and we had a barbecue. And then got to sit and watch the game together. And I think at that point I was like, I'm into this now. And there is a part of us looking at it now and thinking they might do it. They might actually do it. And yeah, I think it's starting to feel a bit real now, isn't it? Hey, hats off to them. They're in a semi-final. They've not played particularly pretty football. They're there. I think at this stage it's not about being pretty. It's about getting results. And hopefully we've got the man in Thomas Tuchel to get the job done. I think if you look at across the spectrum, sort of the other managers who are in charge, they're all winners. They're all winners. You know, Deschamps has won the World Cup. The Argentina manager's he won the last one, you know. The Spain manager won the Euros, so might be our turn for a bit of glory. You never know.
Yeah, it's funny that you should start getting on the topic of being there and done it for this second season in the Premier League. But just a quick question, Gav. If Sunderland arranged a pre-season friendly on the day of the World Cup final and England got through, what would you be picking?
Pre-season friendly every time. And I'm not. I seen a tweet and it was like these weirdos who say they're club over country It was after the game prior to Saturday. Bloody hell, they play again. See, that sort of shows how much I'm into it.
I'm trying to think now.
Who did they play? God's sake, man! It was the one that was during the night. Everyone stayed up for.
Yeah.
Friggin' hell!
Mexico.
Jesus Christ!
Mexico.
Mexico, of course.
I know
Mexico,
I've not
right.
been introduced yet, but I thought I can't just let you two flounder. It was Mexico, right?
It was after the Mexico game. Someone had tweeted something like, "All these club people who say they pick club over country tell us how can they have watched that and say that, after that kind of performance from England?" And I get it. Like, yes, it was an unbelievable performance, and really glad that they got the job done and stuff. But I just don't get the same feeling from watching England as I do Sunderland. So yeah, if we were playing Tiddlywinks at the same time as the World Cup final, I'd still probably watch Sunderland, I think.
Yeah, I did ask you that, knowing fine well what you would say, to be fair. Set you up a little bit. But yeah, you've heard from them already. And luckily for me and Gav, as you've just heard, we have someone to keep us right. Because not only is he the fountain of knowledge on how England are getting on in the World Cup over the last few days, which me and Gav forget, he's also an encyclopedia on all things Sunderland, which is, of course, Andrew Smithson. Hello, Andrew.
Hello. Thank you very much, Chris. I'm not an encyclopedia, and I'm not here to keep you.
You are like.
No. No. Well,
was this in the pod the other day? I think there's a Rotor Rewind, and you had like some annual to hand, literally seconds after somebody asked the question.
Well, exactly. I didn't have it on the top of my head. I just cheat. I've just got all the books to hand. I'll tell you one thing though. You're saying about like encyclopedia, Sunderland knowledge. You know, when you said it's only been twice that we've had a second season in the Premier League, Chris.
Yeah.
I just went, that can't be right. Surely not. Sunderland have been promoted loads of times, and then you go, oh, aye, God, aye, that's right, and it's very, very distressing.
Well, you had us worried already.
We'll get onto it, but obviously after the Keane promotion, we spent 10 years in the Premier League.
Yeah.
So that's why you're in the main.
Yeah, that's it. Well, I was going to say you had us worried there, Andrew, that you were going to put us right on that, and I was going to go.
No.
I've got the intro wrong already. I should read out exactly what I've got in terms of stats with you before we even start, just in case I get it wrong. And by the way, for anybody, obviously we can we've got the medium of video, of course, but it is almost like a bit of theatre doing a Rotor Rewind or On This Week with Andrew, because every 2 minutes when someone else is talking, he just reaches behind and pulls a book out, or to the side and pulls a book out, and he starts flicking through it. And I tell you what, like I said, it's like a performance, Andrew.
But what I'll do is I'll say something like, I think, perhaps just off the top of my head, I think you might find it was 14 years or whatever. Knowing fine well, because I've just read it. So you've given the game away, Chris. Now I'm me character's been ripped to shreds there.
Well, just on a bit of this, Gav. We're drowning in fan mail for Andrew, aren't we?
Oh, the Fandrews are out and about all over your side, aren't they? Justin Bieber's got the believers.
Are we just going to talk about Sunderland or what? Or are you two going to mess about?
Hey,
all right.
I send you it all. It's there. People love a bit of Andrew. I've had people asking if he's on social media. Like, where can we contact Andrew directly? We're going to be stalking him down the beach.
They were debt collectors, to be fair.
Been looking for him for 15 years.
We're going to block them from How We're the Podcast, SEFC at gmail.com. But anyway, let's move on, because we are looking at the second season in the Premier League, because you hear it quite often. You talk about second season syndrome, and a lot of pundits always come out with this, and we can talk about it. Is it being, lazy in terms of just somebody else has said it, and they carry on? So very quickly, to kick us off, I did some a little bit of research, but I will admit it's on the back of a fag packet. So apologies for anyone who turns around and goes, "Oh, you got it wrong by 2% or anything like that." But it's back of a fag packet stuff. So I've just tried to pull all the teams off and see how long they've survived for and all this. And when I was looking, Some of the stats here, gents, before we get going. We've got 57 but I think it's, hang on, what have we got? Sorry,
Oh, man.
I'm confusing the two numbers here. 53% of promoted teams survive their first season in the Premier League. So, which means 47% of sides go down in their first year, which I was a little bit surprised of. But I suppose when you span that, this is over the Premier League history. And I do hate the fact that some people say, history started with the Premier League and it didn't, but we had to draw the line somewhere. So let's go Premier League history. I read something as well that it found, a study said at least one newly promoted team can be expected to remain in the Premier League for between 2 and 5 seasons, 95% of the time, which was surprising. And taking the Premier League era as a whole as well, the average, when you work it out, the average that a promoted club remains in the Premier League is between 3 and 4 seasons before being relegated. So I think a lot of it's been, and I'll start with you, Gav, a lot of it's been skewed, I think, by the recent years where a lot of teams have just survived that 1 year. And then it's like almost people just start thinking, oh, well, this has happened every year, hasn't it? But when you look at it as a whole, 47%, only, less than half, or let's say half the sides go down in their first year, the average being between 3 and 4. It's not strictly true that everyone just bounces straight back down, is it, over the course of the Premier League history?
No, it's not, but we are talking about, 35 years? And in that 35 years, the Premier League has completely changed. And I think particularly the last sort of 5 years, I would say, the increased commercialization of the game has had a direct impact upon how successful teams are on the pitch. And the gap is widening between the top sort of 8, 9, 10 teams in the Premier League and then everybody else, where if you want bringing in the money through player sales, through merchandising, through, commercial revenue and sponsorship and all these things, if you want bringing that money in, you aren't allowed to spend money on the product on the pitch. And we've seen teams sanctioned for that. So, Forest took a huge gamble when they got promoted, basically bought a whole new team, were sanctioned for it. I think they got a points deduction, didn't they? Everton the same. Everton have had points deductions and been heavily sanctioned. I think Villa have, I think West Ham have just had some sort of warning, and it's going to be coming that now after relegation, they might get hit with some sort of fine. You've got Newcastle obviously having to sell players right at the last minute to be able to ensure they dodged the points deduction. Chelsea. So teams are actually having to either break the rules or just flirt with the rules to crack on. And what you're seeing is teams coming up with, and in a lot of cases, they don't have the luxury Sunderland had. They're coming up and they might have already been in the Premier League in the last 2 or 3 years, so they've already spent a lot of money. And then when they get promoted, it restricts their ability to spend. Say Leicester, for example. Leicester get promoted under Enzo Maresca, come into the Premier League in a worse position than they were in the season before, and are now in League One. So that gap is becoming bigger and bigger, and you're probably going to see it again this summer, really, when Ipswich are another team who've already been in the Premier League in the last couple of years. They did bounce back, got promoted again. How much are they realistically going to be able to spend? We don't know, but it should be interesting over the summer. Hull coming in from a weak position because they were already very close to breaking the rules in the Championship. So when they come into the Premier League, yes, there is that increase in revenue, all that TV money, but how much of it they're going to be able to spend is anyone's guess. So these things, it's very different on a year-by-year, club-by-club basis. But I think on the whole, in the last 5 years, it's become more difficult for promoted clubs to spend money. And Sunderland have kind of bucked that trend because of the way we are. And we've basically managed to come into the Premier League having spent very little money. So it gave us an ability to spend over the last year or so where other teams just haven't had that luxury. So I think that's where the data is probably a little bit difficult to read, because 30 odd year ago, clubs were coming, and now we're going to get onto it with Peter Reid's team. Clubs were coming out of the Championship and they were able to compete immediately because the teams were already strong, and maybe the league was a little bit less competitive, and the difference in the standard between the top of the Championship or the Division 1 and the Premier League wasn't as stark where it is now. I think it's becoming harder and harder, isn't it? And yeah, we'll get into it, but I think that's probably the reason why that data maybe doesn't tell the full story.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, talking about data being a little bit skewed, Andrew, because, I mean, like I said, we've done it over the course, some of that data is over the course of, as Gav said, that 30 odd years or whatever it is that the Premier League's been up and running. But I was just looking there, you take the 5 years before last season or something, and what you've obviously got 15 teams, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you've got a third of them who didn't go down after, in that first season. I mean, do you think if you split that data up, between, as Gav says, those early days and maybe the more modern times, we're going to see less and less reaching that average that we were talking about of maybe 3 to 4 seasons being in the Premier League after getting promoted?
I fear so. I think the gap is becoming harder to bridge. I mean, even then, those stats there you gave to us, Chris, are pretty sobering. That's the chances of somebody coming up and fully establishing themselves are not great. When we've done that in the past and we had 10 years in the Premier League, we weren't exactly thriving. There was a lot of those seasons where we're staying up by the skin of our teeth. So yeah, I think in more recent times it has been harder to do. Sunderland, though, seem to have a much more able to look ahead. The club will know these stats. The club will know the stats. The club will know what to do, what they need to do to avoid those things. I think very early last season, it might have been Gav, had a guest on who said teams that stop up usually have done so because they've spent more in defensive areas or they've prioritized defenses. Sunderland obviously looked at that because in attacking positions we signed potential, but in defence we signed established players. So Sunderland will be across all of this. They'll know the best way to try and book the trends. But yes, it is an issue. And again, to just strengthen Gav's point about other clubs are already coming up and they're hamstrung, which means they're already starting kind of like with the hands tied behind the back. I think I've seen Hull were forced to sell their first choice goalkeeper just to meet some requirement. Leeds have been forced to sell one of their players who was, I think, a regular. Was it
Strike, yeah. Did he go? He went to another Premier League team, didn't he?
I think he went to Brighton.
Brighton, yeah,
and then when you look in the Championship, look at the likes of people like QPR, Stoke, who they've tried to come up. They spent the money. You can't say they didn't try to stay in the league, but they've just left themselves now in such a ridiculous position. They've got no real chance of an immediate return. You've got to say that Sunderland's foundations, in comparison, look a lot more stable. I would say, and if anybody is going to break these trends, you'd like to think it was us.
Just quickly, Chris. The thing as well is a lot of teams with aspirations of being in the Premier League will look at us and go, "We want to do it how Sunderland did it," but we really had to sink to the bottom, didn't we, to be able to have that ability? We went to League One where everything was stripped back to the bone, and teams just aren't going to have that ability. And yeah, there's probably an element of luck as well. Getting really lucky with some of the recruitment that we've done. I say lucky, you calculated gambles all deals are, but like I saw something from, I think it was the Hull manager after they got promoted, and he basically said like Sunderland are the blueprint for how we want to do things. But Hull haven't got the wriggle room that we had upon promotion, And teams are going to find that really difficult. Yeah, they're going to look at us and go, what we need to do is we need to recruit young players that have got a high sell-on value. Anyone can do that. It's the foundations that you set in the Championship. And like, there's only one way to survive, and that's to spend money. You cannot do it on a shoestring. Any team coming up this season and not spending money, they're just going to go straight back down. You've got to spend money. You've got to get players in with good pedigrees, good international standards, from winning backgrounds, from Europa League, Champions League teams. You don't do that, you're going back down, unfortunately.
You're right, Gav. A bonus we have as well, we've got money to spend. We know we can spend it well and we can trust our recruitment. A bonus that we've got that a lot of other teams, like Leeds, for example, might not have in a second season is Europe. I've already seen the last day or so, one of the players we've been heavily linked with, I think it's the lad from Roma, I think he's made it known that he wants to go to a club with European football. So automatically, we're now ahead of one of the other clubs sniffing around him who I want to say are Fulham.
It was Fulham, yeah.
Yeah, now they have established themselves in the Premier League. They must have been in there for a few seasons now, but we've now leapfrogged them. And again, it gives us a level of confidence that we're going to be one of the teams who can overcome this idea around a second season.
Yeah, as well. The other aspect to it, and again, I didn't have time to split it up into this sort of to go into this detail, but I imagine the data might become even more clear. And Gav, you mentioned about maybe that there's an element of luck of how teams are promoted, because maybe those teams who went up through the playoffs have got more data behind it to say that they go straight back down. And you think about how far we had to just catch up to Leeds and Burnley to start with, never mind Premier League clubs, 20 points behind those two or something like that, I think it was from memory. But then as well, you're talking about clubs looking at Sunderland to try and do it that way. We had a good side who could obviously beat anyone on their day, but we needed 2 last-minute goals, didn't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. There is an element of kind of like, coulda, woulda, shoulda about all this. Like, if we hadn't have scored them goals, what was it? But we did. And like, it does feel a bit fairy tale with Sunderland, actually, doesn't it? It's all a bit like, surely this couldn't happen any other way. Like, you couldn't write it how mental our promotion was. But then you look at Leeds. I'm glad you mentioned them there, because obviously it's easy to forget. Leeds also stayed up and did quite well in staying up. They didn't struggle necessarily. I mean, there were periods in the season where they struggled, but then they had a bit of a change in system, and home form was good for them, and they just picked up loads of good results and managed to stay up fairly handily, Leeds. But they came into it from a position of strength where I thought, a lot of the players that Leeds brought with them from promotion had already signed for them in the Premier League. So they'd managed to hang on to players. They weren't having to recruit 7, 8, 9, 10 Premier League quality players, because they already had quite a few in the door. And again, there's different ways of doing this. But from that side of things, Leeds did very, very well to stay up. And their story is going to be a little bit different to ours this summer, I imagine, because Leeds have then not got that allure of European football like we have when recruiting players. As Andrew mentioned, we're in for a player at the minute, apparently, with Leeds. And if we're offering similar wages and similar terms to each other, but Sunderland can say, by the way, we're playing in Europa League this season, we get the edge over some of these teams. Newcastle are seeing it with the 2 players that they've missed out on. They thought they had deals over the line, and then Champions League clubs have come in and just took them. Like, it's there's so many different elements to this, isn't there? We could sit here all day going on about it, but like, ultimately, in my opinion, to survive not just 1 or 2 years, but 3, 4, 5 years, it's built on solid foundations. And thankfully, we've got that. I don't know if you can say that about Leeds, and we're about to say that this season. But I've got a sneaking suspicion they might struggle a little bit more than we do this year.
Yeah. Just quickly, gents, bit quiz time for a second. I'm sure it's been in the news recently, but and might have had a clue with actually one of the sides we've mentioned. But anyone got the last year that all three sides stayed up and who they were?
I think, wasn't it only about 4 or 5 years ago? Bournemouth,
Yeah.
Forest, and Fulham, I want to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Bang on. Yeah. 2022 was the last one. Just out of interest as well, quick question on who's the team that has been promoted out of all those years in the Premier League and stayed up the most years, as in what, like a consecutive run of years?
Us? 10
Nope.
years?
Nope.
No?
Did West Ham had longer stints?
They
Oh,
had
Man City. Man
12,
City.
yeah. That's it, Man City. Man City went up in 2000, and of course they're still there, so it's like 26 years. So they're the longest.
But we're not sure about them, are we, Chris? They might still, they might still come down. You never know.
Well, if it's anything like Swindon Town in 1990 with a weird payments, then and might get demoted 2 divisions or something like that. But just moving on to the second season syndrome, as people kind of call it. Now, again, this is back of a fag packet. I was quickly looking at these, of trying to find teams who were relegated in that second season. Now, roughly about 100 sides have been promoted. Just as a guess, as a percentage for you both, how many sides do you think have been relegated after 2 years or in their second season?
55?
You're going about half, Andrew?
Yeah, I would have said more than half. I'm thinking of people like Huddersfield and Bradford who had a great season but then couldn't sustain it. So yeah, I think quite a fair few.
Yeah. And people might be telling us I'm completely wrong with this, and please send in this, but I've got about 10%.
Oh,
Wow.
So
Really?
when I was looking, I had around 11. So you've got Middlesbrough from 95 to 97, Bradford 99 to 2001, Ipswich, which we'll come back to, 2000 to 2002, West Brom 04 to 06, Reading 06 to 08, Hull 08 to 2010, Birmingham 09 to 11, QPR 11 to 13, Hull 13 to 15, Huddersfield 17 to 19, and Sheffield United 19 to 21. There's 2 I want to talk about in this one, actually. Andrew, I'm gonna start off with you, actually, because I think it might have been you who mentioned it. Ipswich, 2000 and 2002, they qualified for the UEFA Cup in that first season. Now, they're the only other club to have, I think, off the top of my head. Actually, Blackburn and Newcastle might have in that one, thinking back. But not many clubs have gone up and qualified for Europe in their first season. It'd be interesting to get that list off, actually. But Ipswich did under George Burley. And I remember that in that summer, they tried to sign people like Fanini George and people like that to try and kick on to the next level. It all went wrong. Their European campaign was a bit rubbish, and they ended up going down. So it's one to, I mean, even though it was 20 odd years ago, it's one to look at, though, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And again, the club will look at every little bit of history and all of the various examples, and they might well look at Ipswich and think, oh, what did they get right in that situation? What did they get wrong? I think they actually signed Chris Macon, didn't they? I think Chris
Yes.
Macon was one of the
Yeah, that's
players,
right. Yeah.
one of the players that bought them towards the end of the season before. But yeah, you often see that, don't you? You see a team comes up into the Premier League, they're the surprise package, they're a breath of fresh air, they're all the cliches you want to see, you want to say. But then after Christmas, they hit a bit of a nosedive and they get found out and the form tails off. Ipswich, though, just kept on going. Ipswich did really well. You're right, it was a long time ago now, so I can't remember the ins and outs. But I wonder if they then perhaps tried to do too much. And if you're signing star names, that looks exciting, that gets the newspaper headlines and gets loads of attention. You've got to be careful, though. If a club who's slowly built a squad up over a few years and have started achieving things, it's then a risk to suddenly change your transfer policy. I don't quite remember if this is what Ipswich did, but I remember Fanini George being linked with them and going there. Sunderland will have to be careful not to rip up what we've done so far just for the Europa League. It's a great thing. It's an amazing thing. It gives us strength in the transfer market. It gives us another reason to appeal to clubs. But we don't want to start now thinking we've cracked it. Let's just completely change tact and do things differently to how we have been.
Yeah, 5 million, I think they spent on him, thinking back, but it was a huge sum then. But Gav, I mean, just on those stats about the second season, obviously you kind of use were all thinking it was around 50%. I mean, first of all, is that kind of a little bit surprising when people go on about the second season syndrome? But the other thing I wanted to point out as well was that recent one with Sheffield United from 19 to 21, because that first season, sure, they were in the top 10. And
they're in the top 5, I think, up until Christmas. They were flying, yeah.
So you could almost argue that's a similar one in the last, let's say that was 6-7 years ago or whatever. So that's fairly similar to maybe what we've gone through, but they did it in a different way, didn't they?
Yeah, I think thinking back to that team, they largely kept the players together that got them promoted, and they had a defined style of play, and it was Chris Wilder's sort of overlapping centre half system where you had like players bombing out with the ball into midfield, which actually, if you kind of look at Sunderland and a lot of other clubs, is the way lots of people play now. But he had this system where you had the players from defence pushing into midfield. You had wing backs playing really high. Around that time, you might remember, actually, I think Phil Parkinson adopted a similar system for us, and it got the best out of players like Jordan Willis, if I remember rightly.
Bailey Wright was brilliant as well in that central position.
Playing right bang in the middle of the two, so more athletic players, so I think that kind of, because that's how Sheffield United kicked on in that first season. They had a way of playing. They were catching teams by surprise. They were difficult to play against, but they got figured out. And the standard of player that they had got figured out, and then they struggled afterwards. And that's where you look at our team now. We went and spent a lot of money to put this team together, and we didn't just buy finished products. Like we did buy Shaq, and we brought Ronaldo to the club, and probably they're probably the only two examples off the top of my head. Actually, maybe Alderete to a degree because he's a little bit older. Nordy. But then these were players who weren't getting, in Nordy's case, wasn't getting a lot of game time, so still had room to improve. And Enzo Lafia, the same, hadn't really proven himself at Roma, so wanted a chance in the Premier League. So we bought players who can kick on, and we talked about this on the World Cup show that we did the other day. In the case of Talbi, Angulo, in particular, Diarra, these are young lads who, after one season in the Premier League, should kick on again. Because of their age, because of their profile, because everybody's expecting them to develop. Whereas it's safe to say the likes of Sheffield United just didn't do that. So again, I feel like I'm like the biggest cheerleader in the world for Sunderland, but I hope I'm making sense. Like, we are very different to a lot of the teams who've gone straight back down because it's built on something. It's not just shit, we're in the Premier League, right? We've had a great season. Now what? I think for us, it's like, this has been 5 years in the making, and we've now got a new plan for the next sort of 5 years to establish ourselves in the Premier League. And you've got to say that up to this point, it's worked. And barring selling our captain or a couple of high-profile sales to really important players, I don't see why there would be a massive drop-off next season. People will point to the schedule of the Europa League and things, but again, I think James Nicholl said this on the World Cup pod that we did the other day. I think we've got one of the highest percentages of Europa League and Champions League appearances amongst our squad. So a lot of these players that we've got have played in clubs who've had to manage that workload. So again, I'm not expecting to see any major drop off in the way somebody like Sheffield United had a couple of years ago.
I think Sheffield United are a decent comparison. The two big differences for me, you spoke there about Chris Wilder, Gav, and his tactic of like the bombing on centre-back. It tells you just how wedded Chris Wilder was to that idea, because I couldn't tell you any other team's tactics from back then. And you'll not be able to do that in the same way with Lebris in a few years, because Lebris is so much more flexible. So it's going to be harder to find Sunderland out, because we change from week to week depending on the game and depending on the opposition. Another thing which seemed to really impact Sheffield United was, I'm sure it was around the time of COVID and no fans in the ground. Have I got me timelines right?
Yeah.
I think, without wanting to big us up as fans, I think at the moment, everybody is behind the team at the moment. Everybody is absolutely loving this squad. We can't wait to get back to games. You know, you said earlier, Gav, you've enjoyed the World Cup more from the point of view as a Sunderland fan than an England fan. That's going to be a massive thing for us next season, I think. Wherever we go, whether it's abroad, whether it's away from home in the Premier League, there's going to be thousands of fans still back in this team and just giving them that little extra percent to keep pushing. I think it could be a huge factor.
Yeah. And the other thing I just want to mention, because I think it's going to be a narrative leading up to the start of the season, that we'll talk about, Gav, I'm sure. But you mentioned the Europa League, of course, which is going to be the big talking point around our second season. But I just think the position we're in, it's a thing to enjoy. There's absolutely no pressure on us achieving in the Europa League. So people talk about the schedules and all this sort of stuff. I think it's very different when you've got a schedule like that, but you've got something in the middle where actually the pressure's off. We're not expected to qualify. We're not expected to go far in it. It's like it's just a bit of an adventure. It's a journey. If we get knocked out, we'll enjoy it anyway. So people talk about the schedule, but it's not like, one of the big clubs. Let's say, when Man United are in the Europa League, the pressure on those players to win it because they're Manchester United is huge. So those are pressure midweeks. Whereas we've got none of that, have we?
That's it. And me and Andrew have been in the company of Tom Burwell and Flo Gasolfi recently, where both of them have repeated this "just enjoy it" mantra. They have. It's like, just enjoy it. And that seems to be the message coming out of the football club this summer, is don't put pressure on ourselves. You're about to watch Sunderland do something they've never done since the 70s. So enjoy it. And yeah, I think that gives us a lot of freedom, if I'm honest. And some of the clubs who are going to be in the mix with us, when you look at Juventus, AC Milan, Bayer Leverkusen, these are clubs who have won a lot of trophies, and every year they play in Europe. So there is a hell of a lot of pressure on them. Whereas the brand new world for us, we can almost a bit like going into the Premier League last season. And it has that same sort of feeling about it, where we didn't expect to be there. We didn't expect to be, hosting some of these clubs at the Stadium of Light and then competing with them. And because of that lack of pressure, look where we ended up. We ended up 7th place, playing in the Europa League, doing things that I just didn't think were possible. And it's almost the same with the Europa League. I can tell you now, when that first game at the Stadium of Light comes around, it's going to feel like a cup final. It's going to feel a bit like the Chelsea game at the end of last season, or West Ham at the start of the season, or Coventry in the playoffs. It's going to have that feeling about it because it's just so new to us. And we've seen this team, this manager, this football club really thrive when it comes to these sort of situations. So like I say, I don't even think it'll get boring. I think if let's say we do get knocked out in the group stages, which I don't think will happen, touch wood, I don't think it'll happen. I think we'll do quite well. But if we did, and we only play 8 games in Europe, they're all going to feel special, because we're going to be going to places we've never been to. We're going to be inviting clubs to the Stadium like that we've never played. It's going to feel special playing games under the light here and that. Europa League anthem play before matches. You can almost treat them as like a bonus, an extra. And yeah, I don't say that. One of the things me and Andrew uncovered when we did the fixtures breakfast pod after we'd attended that event was that 5 of the group stage Europa League games then follow a home match at the Stadium of Light. So I think that's a big advantage, particularly if we manage to get good results in Europe. You're then carrying some sort of form from them games into home games, and we might not get good results, but at least we've got the comfort of coming back to the Stadium of Light. We're not traipsing all over the place to play games. It's going to be tough on us, but we're not going to be traipsing all over we're not going to be going to bloody Bournemouth on a Sunday or whatever. Do you know what I mean? We're going to be coming back to the safety net of Wearside and knowing that our fans are in the stadium behind us for the league game. So yeah, again, world's biggest cheerleader here, but I don't see it as a problem. I see it as a bonus.
Yeah, well, that was just as you were talking there. I was just imagining the pressure on someone like the AC Milan manager to beat little old Sunderland in a game. His owners will be saying, "You're getting beat off who in the Europa League?" But anyway, before we get on to Sunderland specific occasions when we've had that second season, I think we need to take a quick break, and more so because I've just realised I accidentally gave Phil Parkinson a little bit of praise, so I think I need a shower or something during the break. But we'll be back very soon.
Are all batteries the same? That's like asking if all soccer players are the same. Take Messi, the most decorated player ever. Is there any other player who has achieved that? No, just him. Now take Duracell. Is there any other battery with power boost ingredients inside? No, just Duracell. Remember, goats only trust goats because they're built different. And Messi only trusts Duracell.
Here's your report.
Oh, thanks, Jane. I wish I could hire someone just like you.
Try LinkedIn Hiring Pro. It's more than a job board. It's like the recruiter you always wished you had. Hiring Pro uses real-time insights to match your role to LinkedIn's unique network of professionals and delivers a short list of best fit candidates. You'll spend less time sorting applicants and more time talking to the right people.
Let's do it. You're irreplaceable, Jane, but another you would be great.
Hire right the first time. Post your job for free on LinkedIn today at linkedin.com/quality.
Hey, it's Bill from the Bill Simmons podcast. FIFA World Cup 26 fans, listen up. As the official beer sponsor of the FIFA World Cup 26, Michelob Ultra is giving away $1 million worth of FIFA World Cup 26 tickets and prizes. Enter now at MichelobUltra.com/superior access/FIFA World Cup 26. Michelob Ultra FIFA World Cup 26 superior access. No purchase necessary. Open U.S. residents 21 plus begins on December 1st, 2025. Ends on July 31st, 2026. Multiple entry periods. Visit www.MichelobUltra.com/superior access/FIFA World Cup 26 for free entry deadlines, prizes, and details.
This episode is brought to you by Accenture. When your advertising operations fall out of sync, everything else follows. Spotify and Accenture are working together to reinvent the rhythm of ad sales, using automation, analytics, and smarter workflows to simplify campaign delivery and access better data across the business. The result? Less time spent on operations, more time connecting brands with the moments and fandoms that matter most. Learn more at accenture.com/Spotify.
And welcome back to Highway the podcast, and we're talking about second season syndrome and their club's second season in the Premier League. And we've already mentioned that Sunderland have done it twice, where we've prepared for a second season in the Premier League. But a quick question to you both, just on Sunderland history in general. Since we were relegated for the first time in our history, which was back in 1957-58, how many times have we had to prepare for a second season in the top flight of English football? So we've already mentioned the two in the Premier League, but how many in total since that relegation? I think Andrew already knows that.
I think I could have a stab, but if you want to go first, Gav.
4 as a guess?
I think Gav's right. I think it's only 4.
Yep, absolutely. So we'll go back to the 60s for our first promotion. So it was the summer of 65, and then we've got the summer of 81, and the two we'll talk about today, which is the summer of 2000, and the summer of 2008 as well. But Andrew, just talking about that, and I think Gav might have mentioned at the beginning that that did include stints in the top flight. I think there was a stint of 5 seasons, then 6 seasons, and then the 10 seasons that we had in the Premier League that I think Gav might have talked about. But Andrew, taking that into account, we're talking about 5, 6 seasons, 10 seasons here, and that's over the course of 60 years or whatever it is. And I think I worked out at some point a while back that our average position since that first relegation was around 7th in the second tier. As big as we think our club is, does that suggest we're punching above our weight at the moment historically?
In purely footballing terms, I think we probably are. Yeah. Depending on when it goes out, Martin and I have just recorded a podcast with Rob Mason. People might have already heard this by now, but Rob made the point that he's been watching Sunderland for 60 seasons, and the finish last year of 7th was the joint top. In all of that time, I think if you were to ask fans, neutral fans, is Sunderland a big club? They'd probably say yes. And then if you said, why do you think that? It'll be because of the fans, the size of the stadium. Everybody knows who Sunderland are. Not because we're challenging for things. I mean, there's been several times in even in recent years where we've been a bit of a joke on the pitch, but a bit of a laughing stock. So I adore Sunderland, and in my mind, we're the best. But the statistics don't bear that out. And yeah, 7th and qualifying for Europe probably is more than Sunderland could have expected. But again, this is something I often say. That's speaking as a supporter. I think internally at the club, the people that matter, the people making the decisions and planning, they'll not be looking at this panicking or thinking it's job done or anything like that. They've got confidence in themselves. They've got confidence in the plan, and they'll be starting to think and act like a team who are a top half of the Premier League team. I think their attitude will be like that, and it needs to be as well.
Yeah. Well, look, let's get into those two occasions that, of course, we've prepared for a second season in the Premier League, and we'll start with the last time we did it, which was back in the summer of 2008, Gav. Of course, this was all about Roy Keane, really. I know Drummondville, of course, played a part in all that, but of course we were promoted. And then our first season in the Premier League, of course, Roy Keane went on his spending spree. I think he spent something like 40 million quid in that summer, which back then, I think kids who were listening to this will have to believe us. That was a lot of money back then. It wasn't just spent on one player either. But he spent all that money, and we ended up finishing 15th, which, of course, you'll take 17th most of the time when you get promoted, Gav, but 3 points above the drop. But yeah, I mean, can you remember thinking back then, because I remember Roy Keane probably thinking, almost like the club does now, that we could kick on straight away. But looking back, was that first season kind of, can we remember celebrating that, finishing 15th? Was that just, yes, right, we've stayed up? Because I remember the expectation went up a bit when we broke records signing the likes of Craig Gordon, didn't it?
It did, yeah. And I can remember the summer thinking, the summer after promotion thinking, bloody hell, we on. Because we were throwing money about. And at the time, without the benefit of hindsight, I was really excited about the transfer business we were doing. We were signing, we basically went around the championship just taking everyone's best players off them, which was quite a nice feeling at the time. I think nowadays that's not going to fly necessarily. Chopra came in from Cardiff having bagged a lot of goals in the championship. We took Cameron Jones from Southampton, Danny Higginbottom, I think, from Stoke. We brought in Keane Richardson was a real flagship signing that summer, wasn't he, from Man United, because he just had a really good loan with West Brom where he basically kept them up, and everyone was buzzing about that, thinking, oh, what a player we've signed there. And he turned out to be quite a good player for us. But when you actually sit back and look at it on the face of it, we didn't go out and buy established Premier League footballers. We took a bit of a gamble, really. Greg Halford for 3.5 million, having not done anything of note really at Reading. They were rubbing their hands together at that one. Paul McShane coming in from West Brom. So we almost, I don't really like to say it, but we almost stayed up, probably because there were a lot of bad teams in the league that year. I mean, I remember Derby finishing bottom with 11 points, and absolutely, I think that's a record, isn't it? Nobody's beat that record. They're still the worst ever team from the Premier League era.
Thankfully,
yeah,
it took our spot, didn't it?
We only finished 3 points above 18th, and we had a worse goal difference in Reading. So we were lucky in many respects that we had that one extra win, but still we stayed up. That was the main thing. And I think there was a bit of a shift in the summertime of, right, we have to bring in a bit more quality to the squad now. Some of them players that we signed from the Championship weren't good enough. I hate to pick on him, but McShane was terrible. Absolutely shocking, wasn't he? Halford never worked out. Chopra didn't work out. You could go on and on and on. So that summer there was a bit more of a focus on bringing in, right, who can we get from the Premier League, who's played a lot of games, and we seemed to do a bit of a raid on Spurs, didn't we? If you remember, we managed to get 3 of them over the line. We brought in basically within a week of each other 3 players. We had Timo Tainio came in first, who was in and out of Tottenham's team, but was an established international footballer. Pascal Chimbonda, who had been there, done it with Wigan, got a big move to Tottenham, had actually played quite a bit of football at Spurs as well. Wasn't like he was an outsider. And then the big one was Steve Malbronk, who was, a quality footballer, and we all knew it, and had been at Fulham for a lot of years and had done well there. We didn't manage to get Kabul over the line, which was he really wanted Yunus Kabul, didn't he? And he tried to move heaven and earth. And I think his agent was quoted as saying, what was it? The analogy was about an earthquake. I can't remember it now.
No, I remember that now. He wouldn't come to Sunderland unless.
I can't remember. I'll have to look it up. But either way, we couldn't convince him to come. But still, they felt like 3 big signings. El Hadj Diouf came in, who again had been around for a few years. He'd been at Bolton, he'd been at Liverpool, and had done very well at those clubs. But came with a reputation. And then we brought back George McCartney and brought in Anton Ferdinand. Anton Ferdinand was seen as kind of like a player who could really kick on after a move, and there was quite a lot of money involved with that one. So we definitely targeted a different caliber of footballer over that summer, and we moved on players who had been quite handy to us in the Championship but didn't make the transition. We let Graham Kavanagh go, Ross Wallace went, Liam Miller went in the January. So we moved players on that weren't really featuring, and then we brought in the big ones. But big one certainly from that summer for me was the loan of Djibril Cissé from Marseille. That to me felt big. It was like we are proper now. Like we've just signed a really good centre forward there. So yeah, I think there had been some level of recognition, hadn't there, that you have to bring in a higher caliber of player, because we didn't want to have a season like the one before. I'll leave it for Andrew when he comes in, I guess. But the big thing for me was some of the players that Roy Keane signed. I didn't think he would ever want anything to do with El Hadj Diouf or Pascal Chimbonda, or to a lesser extent Kabul, because Kabul, I know when he came to us in later years, was a different kind of person and player, but in them days was, he was quite brash and, maybe not the kind of player that Roy Keane would necessarily have liked to have worked with, but hey, he kind of did buck the trend, and I think in many respects just wanted to bring players in who'd done something to a degree. And yeah, the transfer business that summer was, I thought was pretty exciting. I was expecting us to kick on that summer.
Well, just a quick question before I bring you in, Andrew, for both of you. Who do you think played the most league games over the course of those 2 seasons for Sunderland?
Dean Whitehead, maybe? No.
That's not a bad shout.
Maybe Dean Whitehead.
He played a lot, but not quite as many as
Kenwyn Jones, maybe?
No.
Ledbetter.
You're kind of on the right lines though. You're on the right track.
Dwight York?
No, it was a defender.
Danny Collins.
Yeah.
Okay.
So our first season in the Premier League under Roy Keane, and his second, eventually. But yeah. So just quickly as well, Andrew. I mean, looking at Gav's kind of gone through it all there, but looking at the context of this season as well, I think that there might be a few parallels maybe in where we've come from, because as Gav touched on, the record-breaking season where we were awful in the Premier League. Then Roy Keane brought us from bottom of the Championship. You could say, well, we came up from League One and finished 16th in the last season before getting promoted this time around. The other big thing, obviously, in this summer we had a takeover to deal with because Ellis Short came in that summer. I mean, do you think, even though we ended up buying all those players, that the club, because they changed hands that summer, it just lost a bit of that momentum that would picked up?
Yeah, I think there was a definite shift, and it's hard now to look back at it on hindsight, and I'm trying to remember if I was fearful at the time or if I was just fully in on the Sunderland project and just chuffed to bits that we were spending money. When we'd first come up under Keane, there was a little bit of a fear around us because our previous two seasons in the league had been the 19 and the 15-point seasons.
Yeah.
So I think we actually earned more points in the first Premier League season under Keane than we had in the other two seasons put together. So we'd survived. And I know Gav said it was only by a couple of points, but I think we survived with games to spare and then lost the last two. So I didn't come out of that season feeling as if we'd stopped up by the skin of our teeth. I felt as if, we'd done enough to say we deserved to be in the league. But that summer there was a very different makeup of the players we were signing. And as I say, I don't know if it was hindsight or if at the time I was asking questions. But Gav's already mentioned it. Just look at all the players that Roy Keane burned through really quickly, both before and after this summer. In that summer, Andy Cole, Ian Hart, Varga, they were released. Chopra was on his bike quickly enough. Halford and McShane, who Gav had mentioned. There was a lot of players who he brought in and then went very quickly. And with Chimbonda and El Hadj Diouf, we'll see that they stayed for an even shorter period of time because they came along and just caused a load of bother. Now, we were all in love with Roy Keane at the time and probably thought something, if Roy Keane can get a grip of any of these if anyone's going to get a grip on these personalities, it's going to be Roy Keane. And he suspected that himself, I think. He got a big shock then when he realised that players were starting to have more power and maybe the hairdryer treatment and some of the tactics that worked for Ferguson as a manager just didn't work with this group of players. Keane himself was a very volatile character, but everybody from the supporter base was behind him. Niall Quinn backed him to the hilt. And then over this summer, we started to have people who questioned that because Ellis Short very quickly had issues with him. Diouf and Chimbonda very quickly realised that could work their tickets. So we were a lot more fragile, I think. Everything was all down to this one man, whereas this summer now, in 2026, yes, Regis Labris is a huge character at Sunderland, but he's not the be-all and end-all. There's other people, there's other ideas, there's a group working together. I suspect at the time I was excited and raring to go and just looking at the money being spent and the fact these were established players being brought in. But I wonder if one or two people were just saying, hang on, what's going on here? Where's the checks and balances? Where's who's keeping Roy Keane in check here and who's got a hand on the tiller and what's the end game? I wonder if one or two people were maybe just thinking this is a bit too extravagant now.
Yeah. It's weird, isn't it, Gav? Like, we're talking about on paper, our best spell since that first relegation in the 50s, when 10 years in the Premier League, but then this is where it all started, and we managed to stay up and kind of what happened over the next kind of 8 years after that. But because of, and Andrew's just said it there, and I think you said it, that it's all personality driven by Roy Keane to start with. And then Ellis Short comes in. And again, comparing it to now and the direction the club's got now, which you've already touched on, it was built on matchsticks, wasn't it? It was built on, it was one whim to the other, wasn't it? If it wasn't Roy Keane, it was whoever, even Steve Bruce, right, will build a team in his personality, right? Steve Bruce goes, who's next? Gus Poyet or whatever, right? We'll build a team in his personality. It was one thing to the next, wasn't it? Which is the biggest difference that you were mentioning earlier on.
Yeah, the game's come on a lot in that respect, I think. I think clubs have realised that with the increased eyeballs on spending and spending caps and how clubs generate money and all these things. One, you can't just hire and fire managers. Two, you can't recruit solely for one manager. You have to recruit for the football. So basically, you establish an identity, and then you recruit players that fit that identity, like the way you want to play, the type of club you are, etc., etc. So that when players come and go, when coaches come and go, when managers come and go, not much changes really. Everything there's not a dramatic shift in a negative direction. And I suppose to many degrees, I suppose like the when Keane was our manager, that was sort of the tail end of the old era, I would say, in football. Probably sort of 4 or 5 years later, we were then hiring sporting directors and that worked to varying degrees as we were trying to basically figure things out in this whole new world of football. But it wasn't long after Roy Keane, was it, that we appointed Defanti? What was it? 4 years, maybe? 4 years after Keane had left. So we'll not get into what went on between then, but my point is that this was like Keane was kind of bringing his style into the game, but he'd learned from Brian Clough, he'd learned from Sir Alex Ferguson. So he'd probably taken a lot from the way that they did things, and that was adopted into his way of management. Whereas these days, it's like a Roy Keane just wouldn't be able to be a football manager, I don't think. We are seeing a slight shift back in the other, it's circular, things come back around. We are seeing a slight shift. So, you look at Unai Emery at Aston Villa, he's got a hell of a lot of say in what goes on. Arteta did at Arsenal. Guardiola at Man City. So we are seeing kind of things swinging back towards that way. But for us, for Sunderland, I don't think we could necessarily operate in that way. We couldn't go out and, I don't know, hire a Glasner like what Forest have done and go, right, it's all on you now. You get all the big... Our coaches have a say, but they're not the final say, because ultimately they could be out of a job in the next 6 months, and then what do? We can't be back in a position like we were in then, where Roy Keane leaves and somebody had to pick the squad of players up, and thankfully Ricky Sabregia did enough to get us over the line. But then it made the next appointment crucial, because whoever came in had to have, one, their own say on things, but two, they had to work with the squad that they were inheriting from Roy Keane. And Steve Bruce was the next man through the door, but he kind of came through the same school as Roy Keane, so he wasn't a massive departure from what we were already used to. He'd came through at Manchester United, he was old school, so he was able to work with a lot of the players that he'd inherited from Roy Keane. But ultimately, it's not a way to run your football club. It just isn't anymore. And like I say, it's been a long time since I've really thought about that era, but thinking back now, I think we were probably lucky that we were a little bit lucky that we survived. But then you see what then happened 6, 7, 8 years later. It was all a knock-on from that era. We were constantly just putting bandages over whatever the problem was, and eventually it all unraveled. And maybe we've got to be thankful that we went through all that crap to be where we are now. But bloody hell, we're talking about what was it, 2008, 2009? We're talking about this current era of Sunderland being a byproduct of what happened then. It's mad, really.
Yeah, 100%. I always find it weird that, like I said, our best period since that first relegation on paper, we always look at it negatively now. It's a really odd thing. But Andrew, just moving back, because Reidy went through it 8 years earlier in the summer of 2000. Little bit of a kind of a different way of doing it, because whereas Roy Keane rebuilt, Reidy pretty much carried on the momentum of that promotion, 105 points. Needed slight rejig with big players like Alan Johnson and Lee Clark moving out, but Stefan Schwartz came in. And brought Steve Bould in, of course, to give us that experience in that first season. Again, so that was the first season. We wanted to stay up. Didn't think we'd finish 7th at the start of the season, but we did, just missing out on Europe. In that first season, similar to last season in some ways, on this occasion, we were 2nd in late January after a goalless draw against Bradford, in the same way as we were flying high in, I think, November, December of the season just gone. But in Reidy's day, we won 3 of the remaining 14 games after that visit from Bradford to the Stadium of Light. Looking back, in that summer of 2000, we just finished 7th. Do you think that end to the season, and it's interesting, we'll come on to it in a second, but do you think that put a little dampener on the fact that, we should have really been celebrating the fact that we finished 7th, but everyone was talking about what could have been?
Yeah, we did. We tailed off a little bit. I mean, that Chelsea win before Christmas, up until these last few weeks, everybody considers the greatest ever win at the Stadium of Light. That this is how big it was that year. Everybody was loving it and talking about it being, the greatest days in Sunderland's post-war history and all of this. I think Peter Reid, like Roy Keane, there's a definite cult of personality around them, and they're very big driving forces and very obvious heads of the club, and what they said went. And yes, sometimes some of the stuff they could do could be on a whim. Roy Keane would think nothing of getting somebody like Dixon Atuhu in and then selling him after a season. Danny Higginbotham was in for only a season. Peter Reid did the same with players, and it didn't matter if you'd had countless caps for Germany or Sweden. If your face didn't fit, tough luck. So Peter Reid was the huge man behind all of this, and yeah, the season did drop off, but we all still just adored Reid and followed him. I mean, you talked about when Lee Clark and Alan Johnson and Michael Bridges were all kind of moved away from the first team scene. Can you imagine the amount of grief a Sunderland manager would have got in more recent times if something like that had panned out? But we were all fully behind him. That season, we were brilliant. I do think the Premier League then was a very strong league, whereas now the Premier League is the best league in the world, which is why I think this time around Labrisse's achievement is better than Peter Reid's was. But we bridged the gap pretty well. We looked good. And that summer, after that first season, I were tailed off, and it was a bit of a shame, but we had Kevin Phillips, one of the best known players in the world at that time. The North Stand was being extended, if you remember that summer. We just moved to Nike. We got a big kit deal with Nike. The first time in my life, and perhaps for the first time in a lot of supporters' lives, Sunderland were big time. We were oh, wow. I've heard the stories about Sunderland in the 50s. I've never seen it for myself. So there was a lot of buzz around the club. Reid was busy again in the transfer market, but when you go through the names of who he signed, you can see that the hit and miss columns are starting to fill up quite a bit. I mean, do you remember the 3 we signed all on one day? Hutchinson, Macho, and Peters. That just shows exactly how different Reid's transfers could be. He could get it brilliant and on point, or you could get somebody like Tom Peters who just didn't do anything at the club.
I would say he was busy to an extent, but not too busy. I mean, the team didn't change a great deal from the season before. I know you mentioned them 3 players there. Don Hutchinson was a big signing because he added so much to the team that summer. I think Julio Arca was probably a bit of a gamble. We signed him as a young player, and I think it's safe to say with Julio, and he probably hit the ground running a lot quicker than anybody expected he would. He literally straight into the team scoring goals. Couldn't speak a word of English. Was a young kid moving halfway across the world, but just hit the ground running. Varga worked out for a period till he started picking up injuries and what have you. And then Emerson Tom was an established Premier League player who'd been there and done it elsewhere. But the team wasn't massively different. We didn't, in terms of what we lost that summer, Steve Bold retired, Helmer left and retired, but Helmer hadn't really played under Reid. Darren Holloway moved on, but he was a squad player. So we didn't lose a great deal over that summer. I think it was largely the same team who'd really done very well the season before, wasn't it? And it was actually probably after that season when he started making rafts of changes to the squad that things unravelled as quickly as it did. And you said there about cult of personality, Andrew. I think it's bang on. It was a bit of a cult of personality with Reidy, but also he had this trusted group of players who, on and off the field, were like soldiers. They were together. They were best mates on and off the pitch. And once people started getting a little bit older, and once people started falling out with Reidy, and once things started to get a bit fractured, that's when the whole thing fell apart. And it was built on poor foundations. It was ultimately, we had a really good run where we had 2 great years in the first division, 2 great years in the Premier League. But then what happened next? Nobody had the foresight to go, Niall Quinn's going to retire soon. These players aren't going to be here forever. What do you do next? And his answer to that was recruiting from abroad in many respects, where it wasn't his forte. His domestic recruitment was unbelievable, but his foreign recruitment was terrible, if we're being very, very honest. There were a handful of players that did well, but ultimately foreign recruitment was probably his Achilles heel. And when money wasn't particularly available in huge amounts, he wasn't spending massive amounts on money, and Murray didn't necessarily have an open checkbook for him. He couldn't afford to be wasteful, and he was, unfortunately. But specifically on this season, the follow-up season where we finished 7th again, I would say the reason we had another good season was probably because it was largely the same team. Would that be fair?
Yeah. And just to kind of sum up, we're talking about his whims. If you do look at the 99-2000 season in the complete record, match 3, Helmer made debut. Match 4, Helmer last game. I think that pretty much sums up the type of thing Peter Reid can do.
Am I right in I'm sure it's probably been mentioned many times in the past. I'm right in thinking, though, we let him go out on loan and he played in the Champions League, didn't he?
Yeah.
Which is a strange one to me. It's always rankled with me, that. Yeah,
and a shameless plug for my On This Week piece last week. I think by the time this goes out, because I did it on Thomas Helmer signing as well as everything else that was going on that day. But anyway, shameless plug. But the big thing, of course, in that summer was, as Gav, you touched on, Nicky Summerby leaving and Don Hutchison coming in, because I think it showed how much we ended up relying on Don Hutchison in that second season, that it kind of all fell apart after he left, which it goes into your point about not really planning for further down the line. But just thinking about it, Gav, because I mentioned at the beginning that I think a lot of the conversation back then about these 2 seasons, and you can go back to the summer of 2000 specifically, in between those 2, the summer that we're talking about, where a lot of the conversation was about, we were second in January, we were 3rd in February, or when we started to lose games. And that was more of the conversation rather than, bloody hell, we're finished 7th. And it was also, we just missed out on Europe, rather than, bloody hell, we just missed out on Europe. It's a different way of looking at it. Comparing it to the season just gone, because if you look, probably similar kind of drop-off in some ways, that we were flying high Champions League places. I remember me and Andrew talking about after the game at Stamford Bridge, and we were celebrating the fact we're jumping into the top 3 or something like that. Do you think we've dealt with it better this time, with that sort of season trajectory, that we've started off flying and then tailed off a little bit, maybe than we did back then?
I think, yeah, definitely. We didn't have the same. When you take, Andrew kind of said it there, when you take sort of the quality of the league into account now as compared to then, it's a far bigger achievement. Also factor in how many players we lost to AFCON this year, just gone. Peter Reid never had that to contend with, and it wasn't the game. The AFCON period didn't actually harm us particularly. It was after that. So you had Granit Xhaka running himself into the ground after the AFCON. He picks up an injury. We had other players picking up injuries and problems, and we kind of stretched the squad in that period. And it was after AFCON, when everyone was back, that then we started having problems. But then we navigated it brilliantly. Whereas when I'm kind of looking at the 2000-2001 season, the trajectory of the team, second in the league going into Christmas, which was just, still ridiculous to me, that. But I can remember going, I can always remember this, me and my dad going on the bus to Man U away, and there was a feeling then, genuinely, like, could we have went top? I can't remember now. Could we have gone top, or it was like us and Man United, wasn't it, going into that game just before the New Year, and we get beat, but all the conversation was like about, bloody hell, what could Sunderland achieve? And then the form just tails off horrifically after Christmas. And an important thing to note, we didn't do much business over the winter. I think the only player we signed was Carter on loan, and that was in March. So there was nothing done from a recruitment perspective to address any issues that we had in the squad. Reid was very much like, this is the team, this is the way we play, we're going to crack on. And I guess with the benefit of hindsight, you could probably say, why didn't we go out and make one or two quality additions in the winter that would have probably helped sustain the level we were at? Because it's very difficult. Like, he was very reliant, Peter Reid, wasn't he, on basically 11, 12, 13 players right throughout his success at Sunderland. And I know attitudes have changed in the game. Back then it was like, you played the same 11 virtually, 4-4-2, didn't matter how many games there were, they're professionals, they should be able to deal with it. Now the game's attitudes have changed, and it's a very much a squad game now. But you can't help but wonder, all these years later, bloody hell, if we'd just gone out and signed a couple of players to help the squad out, would we have even finished in the top 4 of the Premier League that season? And this season just gone under Regis Labrise. We didn't go out and splash the cash in January. We didn't need to. We went out and made a handful of additions that I think did help the squad. Tabby would have played more if he'd been fit, because we saw him. He was trusted to start a game. He gets injured. Angulo picked up an injury, but Angulo was brought in to add strength down that left-hand side after we allowed Adingra to go. I just think, again, to repeat myself, I think we just dealt with the situations better this time than we probably did in the past, but there was less of a recognition in Reid's day, wasn't there, that, it's a squad game and you need to rotate in players in and out. I bet if you look at that sort of from January onwards to about March, I bet his team's barely changed. It'll have been largely the same 12 or 13 players playing. And yeah, when you look at it, you can kind of understand why we probably tailed off. They were probably just knackered. They were probably just flagging, and they were trying to get through each game. And there's a big old run there from, we beat Ipswich in the FA Cup at the end of January. And after that, we win like one game in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We win 1 in 12. And the next win wasn't until the end of April. So we won a game in the middle of March against Chelsea. In the middle of March away at Stamford Bridge. And then we didn't win again until the end of April. 1 win in 12. Given the time of the season and the way he was, it had to have been legs, personnel, bodies, injuries picking up, and issues stemming from that, I would imagine.
I think that will have been an issue, but as well, it's not just it was the same players, it was exactly the same tactics. And Labrise was changing things around a lot. We were hard at the plan to play against. And yeah, I take the point that Sunderland now, in the season just gone, we did have a drop-off compared to before and after Christmas. But even after Christmas, we weren't going 12 games with just 1 win. And I think, didn't that happen both seasons? I'm sure 99, 2000, right up until we took a beating off Everton 5-0, and then it took us about 3 months to win a game in the new millennium. So the seasons were similar patterns. And also, we're talking about squad building and what have you. Back then, there wasn't the transfer windows that we have now. Reid had somebody come along, could very well have brought them in at the time to try and stop those slumps.
Yeah, those are big differences because if you look at the season just gone, we didn't have that sustained period really of not winning games. I think the worst run was maybe 2 wins in 12 or something like that. But I think the difference was that we didn't have too many runs where we were really getting beat because we, especially in the first half of the season, we would make sure we got something out of the game. But just to sum it up, Andrew, because we went through the stats of the second season and looking at around 10% actually go down the second season. You look at Sunderland's record, 4 promotions to the Premier League, getting relegated twice in the first season, and then the other 2 occasions that we've discussed, a 4-season stint and a 10-season stint. Do those stats back up the fact that if you get over that first season, then actually you're on for a decent stint in the Premier League?
Very possibly. And Gav and I were both shocked when you gave the stats about how, relatively speaking, teams who do have a second season in the Premier League, most of them do well and don't get relegated. So yeah, maybe second season syndrome is a phrase that gets bandied about and people are like, oh, gotta be careful about that. When in reality, it's not as big an issue. Again, hindsight's is really tricky because at the 2 times of those seasons we've looked at, I will have been raring to go. I feel this time as if we've got something better and more sustainable and something stronger in place to build on it. But back in those 2 summers, had you asked me at the time, I probably was fully behind the club and expecting us to do well. If you look at it a little bit more critically, though, yeah, I think we're shaping up a little bit more comfortably. 2 points I'd just quickly like to make, if I may, please, about that summer there under Reid. That was the summer where Kevin Phillips had scored 30 goals, was the top scorer in Europe, and didn't get a sniff in the European Championships. That was a talking point, and that added to the atmosphere around the club. It added a bit to the kind of like them and us, which I always think does us well. But, kind of like, oh, so Sunderland can have the best striker in the continent and he's still not going to get international games. The other thing I just want to mention, and I know it always sounds like I'm having a pop at Reid. I don't mean to. He was fantastic for us and he did some amazing things for us. That summer, you can never go too long without there being a random player in on trial. And I was looking at the records for this pre-season. We beat a team from the Netherlands 9-0. And one of the players was somebody called Cedric Bardon. And I was like, who on earth is that? So I went and dug him up. He was apparently a French under-21 striker who played for us 3 times that summer and unsurprisingly was not offered anything permanent. So there you go.
Well, on that though, Chris, very quickly, that kind of points to the lack of planning. He was just like, I get him on. We had a million players in on trial. We did it. Did we do something on the pod regarding this? I can't remember now. But I looked right into it and I found there was basically a checklist type thing in one of the pages of the Echo from back in that day. And it was all the trialists that Reid had in over that summer, and there was about 30 of them. and when I was searching the name, because I hadn't heard of most of them, if not any of them really, when you're searching them up, they were complete randoms, and it was like, who on earth is giving them these players on trial?
What?
And it just felt like it was so scattergun. I mean, the only thing you could say in his credit was that he was very picky with the trialists. Like, not many of them got contracts. If I think about it, I read something. Stan Varga was a trialist, so we ended up paying for him, but he was allowed to come in on trial. I think Macho and Peters were as well. So he did get a look. He did like to have a look at a player before he gave them a deal, but like completely random, no real sense behind it. And actually, in a lot of the cases when I was looking at the names of the trialists, a lot of the ones he said no to would have been good signings. There were established internationals who, after we turned them down, played at a good level, and you were looking at it going, actually, they could have probably done a job for us. So it is that whole era is really interesting to me, the way that he recruited, because when it come to looking abroad, I don't think he had much of an idea really. He waited till he saw them in person and made a very quick judgment on them.
The gag at the time was always that Sunderland had more trials than the Old Bailey. I mean, it was a thing, but what there when you're saying you found a thing in the Echo, a graphic, sometimes something that always grabs me is when I see these links when I'm preparing to do it on this day or whatever, it'll just be like a little footnote. Oh, so-and-so is on trial. He's a striker and he's an international for whatever country he is. And then when you go and check it out on Wikipedia, he wasn't an international. Back in those days, you just had to believe what the paper was telling you. And if Peter Reid has said to the press, oh, we've got a lad in on trial, we're having a look at him, he's an international striker, the Echo had no way of checking that out, so probably just printed it as fact. It's only now when you've got Wikipedia and years later you can go, it was nowhere near as good as the record suggested. Anyway.
Another quick shameless plug, actually, just on some of that. If people go back and listen to the conversation we had with Thomas Sorensen, he said, years later, he said it was always great to meet up with those lads and great to meet up with Peter Reid. And he said he always had a few drinks with Reidy when they met up down the line. He said he ended up having one conversation with Reidy years later where he was like, oh, so what made you sign us and all this sort of stuff? He said, well, Tony Coton told us to. When I'd never seen you play. I didn't know what you looked like. He said, I'd never seen any videos. Just Tony Coton said you were good, so I signed you. And he turned around to Tommy Sorensen. He said, if you were crap in those first few games, you were out. Said Tommy Sorensen, he says, he's good job he didn't know that at the time. He would have been crapping himself on the pitch.
Right.
But,
again, though, you look at, I mean, we're spiraling here, but Sorensen, look at it, he never played for the club that we signed him from. He had a year out on loan somewhere, and I think he'd had a few. He'd had like a trial at Man U, and Courtney had seen him play for, I think, for Denmark at youth level or something, and that's where the recommendation came from. Completely random, like. And you look at the series of goalkeepers that we had under Reid. You had initially, anyways, you inherited Alex Chamberlain, didn't he? Shea Given came in on loan. Then you had Lionel Perez, then Sorensen. And then the keepers under Sorensen were again completely random. Jurgen Macho, what was the other guy called from Everton? Thomas Myra. Yeah, they're just so random. There was no none of it made sense. Courton was signed, and that was the most sensible one. Then he picks up a horrendous injury. You know what I mean? It was like I just don't understand a lot of that recruitment.
Go on, Andrew.
I didn't know if you wanted to name check him, Chris, or if I was going to name him. We're both thinking of Edwin Zoetebier here at the moment.
Yeah.
Well, there's that as well. But I think Martin mentions it a couple of times that Reidy always tried to solve this problem. And he started off, he wanted Stephen Pears when he first came in and didn't get Stephen Pears. And then he wanted Brad Friedel, but couldn't get a work permit.
Oh, yes. Aye.
That's a sliding doors moment, isn't it?
And then
what might have been with Friedel?
There was another work permit issue with Bogdan Stella as well.
Yes. Who was on trial.
Yeah.
He'd had a big old trial with us. So again, had been in on trial. And I've read the Echo reports from around the time, and he was really keen on him. Really keen on him.
Yeah.
Well, Bogdan Stella was established. Why is he having to have a trial at the Charlie Hurley Centre?
Seriously, Andrew, if you look at a lot of the names of the players that were published in the Echo around the time, particularly sort of the first promotion under Reid, these were established internationals, and they were being brought in on trial. It's mad, isn't it, when you think about it? It just wouldn't fly. Imagine saying to a Sweden international with 30-odd caps now, right, you're going to have to come and show us what you're made of at the academy, by the way. That agent wouldn't even reply to your email, would he?
Yeah. Well, wasn't it Robo Striker Ronan Harazi who had whose legs were made of metal or something?
He had a trial.
He had like,
trial.
but didn't he have like 50 caps for Israel or something at the time?
Yeah.
It was like anyway. We knew we would go down a rabbit hole here. I think we might have picked a new rewind topic there, Andrew. Sunderland trialists down the years.
I think I've stuck it on the list at some point, so it's there.
Might be a good one. That. Anyway, just to finish off this conversation, we've been through Sunderland's previous 2 times when they've had us prepared for a second season in the Premier League. We've looked generally across the board. Gav, for Sunderland, how much is this a crossroads? Because we feel like we're onto something big. In the last 2 times, we've talked about being personality driven, the club not quite being set up with a structure. They're just saying, right, well, we've got a personality embrace. It's good. Let's let them crack on. How much of this is a crossroads into our long-term plan?
Yeah, it is. Obviously, there's always some level of jeopardy, isn't there? You know, we don't know what kind of season we're about to have, but I'm confident in the structure of the football club. That means that this season isn't going to be a negative experience, and that's because, you know, people will go, oh, they'll say second season syndrome. They'll say Europe's going to be difficult. What if you do well in the League Cup? What if you do in the FA Cup? How are you going to deal with all these games? As I've already said, a lot of the players we've signed have already played European football. They've already played at a high level for a long time. We talk about additional games. Granit Xhaka's just played another 6 games at the World Cup, nearly 34-year-old. Noah Siddiqui, Nelson Angulo, Chemson Talbi, Brian Brobby. They've all had their seasons extended and coped just fine. In a lot of cases, look bloody fresh, actually. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not saying this as like, I'm not worrying about it, and I don't think anybody should. I think we should instead, to go back to something we said right at the top of this, we should enjoy it. We should relish it. We should see it as an opportunity. And I think the big learning from this chat has been in the past, when we've managed to get into a second season and beyond, it's been built on rotten foundations. In this case, it really isn't. Anybody who suggests that Sunderland's foundations aren't solid are clueless, because we can just see that we're quite clearly built on very solid foundations. We're a solid structure, and that should allow the club to flourish. And whether that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to finish in the top 10 again, but I don't see us bombing, because what is there to suggest that would happen? We would have to have an absolute catastrophe occur at the football club for that sort of thing to happen. And as it stands, fingers crossed, touch wood and all that, things seem pretty good from where I'm sat. So I'm very confident we're not going to suffer in the way maybe previous Sunderland teams have. And I'm not talking about after second seasons, or just generally with the next 2, 3, 4 years in mind. We are built on solid foundations, and that's something to be celebrated.
Yeah. And just to finish it off, Andrew, I'll put a similar point to you, just about this being a crossroads potentially. And, you know, that, as Gav said, I think that's an important point that Gav's just raised there. I think we've got plenty of wiggle room, haven't we, in terms of, you know, that next season, if they'd done a 5-year plan, you know, maybe this season coming up, they might have had, you know, mid-table, you know, consolidation written next to it. And if that happens, it might be a drop-off, but actually progress isn't always linear, is it? So, you know, even if we did not, you know, finish, let's say 12th, let's say 10th, something like that, not quite as, you know, the high levels we reached this season, but that would still be a success, wasn't it? So there's lots of wiggle room in what is a success for this second season, isn't it?
Of course there is. And as fans, as Gav said, as you said, we're here to enjoy it. We want to get excited. But yeah, in terms of the club's trajectory, we can afford not to be as brilliant as we were and still be in a good place. When you compare it to those other 2 times of us having a second season in the Premier League, neither of those seasons that followed were good, and very quickly afterwards things unravelled even quicker. So yeah, if Sunderland are mid-table, if Sunderland have only consolidated, which is an achievement in itself given our previous times, as long as the wider picture looks good and the structure is still there, and maybe say one or two signings of come on and now look as if they're going to be able to kick on, you can still go away from 26, 27 feeling positive about the future. I think the difference now is if something goes wrong, if something changes, we can be comfortable with the idea that we'll react to it well. Whereas when Don Hutchinson left, it was a mess. We didn't know what we were going to do. There were so many things there that, like, the stadium extension, I seem to remember at the time people thinking it was an either or. You either extend the stadium or you strengthen the squad. There's whisperings about stadium extension this time, but at no point is it going to be at the cost of on the pitch. So we're in a better position. Hopefully, long term, we can build on this. If this season isn't as good as we suspect, it won't be a disaster. But there is just this little part of me thinks, whatever the fans expect, whatever the fans would consider as a good season, I reckon the Briss and the management are probably just laughing and thinking, don't worry about it, lads and lasses, because we've got something up our sleeves. We'll be just fine. You think 12th is good. Wait till you see when we finish 4th. Then you'll know what's going on.
Go on, Andrew.
Yeah. And actually, I mean, just to try and avoid a tangent, but talking about stadium extension, I saw Leeds plan for a fan zone near their stadium, and it looks fantastic. If they do something like that, I'd love something like that around the stadium. Anyway, but that's for another day, because as usual, we've talked on far too much or longer than we expected to. So just leave me to say, Andrew and Gav, thank you very much. Fantastic points today, gentlemen. Thank you very much. And I certainly didn't expect to raise Phil Parkinson and Bogdan Stella about the last two times the second season of the Premier League. But anyway, thanks again, gentlemen, and thanks again, everyone, for listening. Don't forget, we'll have loads more on the Roker Report website, and we'll be back tomorrow with another How We're the podcast. I have no clue right now what that will be or what it'll be about, but we will be back for another How We're the podcast. But from us, it's bye for now.
Hi, Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. Are you looking for a beach read this summer? May I suggest your big wireless bill? It's got suspense, mystery, a slightly flat emotional arc, and a shocking twist where you realize you've been overpaying the entire time. Fortunately, though, Mint's story is better. Every plan, $15 a month, even unlimited. That's it. Happy ending, zero tears.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan required. $15 per month equivalent. Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only. Greater than 50 gigabytes may slow when network is busy. See terms.